I would say officially we're within the office. I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors.
The state of Canada's economy gets worse with every passing minute, and it has nothing to do with the decisions of Donald Trump. It has everything to do with the decisions of Mark Carney, the Liberal government, and all of their policies. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. We've got a lot to go over in this episode. It's all going to be about the economy. We're going to talk about what the PBO said about Prime Minister Carney's spending habits, and we'll talk about how the government is taking jobs out of the country. Further, I'm going to be addressing some of the questions I get in my comments about how the government is doing all of this spending without the permission of Parliament. However, before any of that happens, I want to encourage all of you that are not subscribed to the channel to subscribe to the channel, and everyone out there to share, like, and comment on this video. Let's get into this. We're going to open with the PBO's appearance before the committee last week, where the entire committee, we won't be discussing just the first round of a couple of questions out of the first round of questions. The Conservatives ask a question about the definitions that the Liberal government are hoping to impose upon the budget so that they can try to convince Canadians about distinguishing between what's expenditures and what is investment. And the Conservative answer was one thing, probably pretty shocking and pretty damaging to the reputation of Mark Carney. The Liberal government thought they had an I gotcha moment, however, and the answer to that is just hilarious.
I would say officially we're within the office. I don't know that the government currently has fiscal anchors, which of course causes the people that I work with a considerable degree of concern at this point. With respect to your point regarding the capital and the operating side, we haven't seen a clear definition of what would fall into capital and what would fall into operating. So at this point, it's impossible for us and for you as parliamentarians to assess the likelihood or probability of the government hitting any fiscal target.
Regarding the line of questioning that was just asked, what was the old definition of operating expenses that was used beforehand?
Well, I think the standard definition that we would go to, so we published a note on this over the course of the summer. There ends up being a standard definition that I think a lot of people will be familiar with in the budget. So in the budget, when you're looking at the expense line, the expense table, you come down and there's a line called operating expenses. And typically those operating expenses, as currently defined by the Government of Canada, primarily include things like salaries. So salaries, things related to salaries like professional services expenses, utilities, anything related to the ongoing operations of the government. And again, anything I would say at this point is a speculation, right? Because there hasn't been an official backgrounder issued by the Government of Canada, by the Department of Finance regarding what the new definition could potentially be. But yeah, that's the traditional definition that all of us are familiar with.
I would be laughing at that Liberal minister's attempt to trip up the Economist if this wasn't such a serious subject. I would be laughing if Canada wasn't so close to economic collapse. I feel the Liberal government's attempt to redefine yet more language, like they did with the word recession, to be a fairly pathetic attempt to trick Canadians into thinking that it's not their fault. See, there's no difference in the amount of money going out. There's no difference in the amount of economic prosperity or economic ruin. All they are really hoping to do here is to deflect blame. That's their motivation. Their motivation is not to say you did a great job, you saved the country, you have made millions of Canadians prosperous and well-fed, and their kids go to school every day with lunches that their parents were able to provide for them. No, that's not their motivation. Their motivation is to say it's not our fault. And look, we're going to tell you all about how it's not a recession, and we're going to tell you all about how these expenditures are different, and how the fact that you're flat broke is not the people who've been running this country for 11 years. It's not their fault. So we're just going to redefine next they'll be redefining what the word fault is, I'm sure. It's kind of frustrating for people like me to sit here and think, there are individuals in Canada who thought this was the best way forward for the country, to elect the exact same people for the exact same result, because that's all you were ever going to get was the exact same results. And anybody out there who thought to themselves, well, it's all just going to work out okay if I keep my head down and I don't worry about sticking my head into the world of politics, needs to understand that it doesn't matter what you feel about politics. Politics is in every aspect of your life. And not understanding that, not taking charge of that, is something that is kind of, you need to look inside to think about. Because the economy and the amount of money that these guys are wasting and throwing away, and the amount of people who are suffering as a result of these decisions, is your neighbor. It's people all around you. This isn't another country. This isn't Ukraine. This isn't far away on the other side of the world. This is, in fact, in many Canadian situations, of what they ran away from, the governance that they ran away from. And now they're coming here and electing the exact same governance. So the government says, we'll just redefine the words, and then hopefully Canadians won't be able to blame us, and then they'll vote for us again, which seems to be what's going on. I get that there's more and more people coming to this conservative side of the aisle. What I do not understand is why it is that the people that are on the liberal side of the aisle think that they're doing a good job by redefining words rather than making the results. Like, I just don't understand why talk weighs more than results. Maybe that's just me. A great example of the mismanagement of our tax dollars by the government is the ferries that are being sent to China to be built for British Columbia. Of course, what everybody overlooks is that those ferries are being built with tax dollars. Well, I mean, the government is having a hard time with less and less people working, collecting taxes. So they're actually borrowing money to send to China. And then you and I, as a taxpayer, will pay that loan back. And the ferries in British Columbia will get a forgiveness for all of the rest of it, which we, as the taxpayer, will also have to pay. Rather than keep that construction inside of the country, at least allowing that $1 billion to be introduced into the system. They sent that money to be introduced into the Chinese system. You and I have to pay for it. So we are essentially sending money right into the Chinese system. Some of the industry people came before committee to talk about that.
There's definitely steel producers in Canada that can produce it. The Nanacoke, what we call the lake operation, I'm not sure. I know Algoma that is in big trouble and on their knees right now. Just, it's so fragile in the Sioux. They have a history of doing it. The other thing we need support with, whatever steel, I think most steel manufacturers could do it, but to do a one-off is difficult. We need a commitment and maybe investment in technology to change the process so we can do it. But my answer to your question is yes, that steel for those ships could have been provided by Canadian producers.
Thank you for that answer.
Well, I think that's such an important question because it forfeited many jobs. I can't list them all, but the supply chain is just as important as for argument's sake, the steel itself, the ship itself. There is many jobs, many communities that, something like the auto industry, quite frankly, has so many other links in Canada, if we do it right, that many communities, many workers can benefit from shipbuilding through the supply chain. And to your original point, when we just race to the bottom for the cheapest price, what we really do lose is the taxpayer base. A lot of these jobs are good jobs, raise a family, perhaps own a home, retire in dignity. And when that work isn't provided to Canadians, we lose the tax base. We lose the tax base for hospitals, education, infrastructure. So you got to look at more than the bottom line as we move forward.
Okay, so what I wanted to showcase there was the various topics that you keep hearing from the proponents of sending this money to China. Oh, nobody in Canada wanted to build it. Well, we have a steel industry that, as you heard that individual say, is on his knees, with a long history of building ships, don't forget, or at least supplying the material for ships. And these guys sent the money to China where it could be done on the bottom line, or race to the bottom, as you heard him say. Now, what I also want to point out is the cultural impact of this money being sent to China, because the taxpayer, of course, is paying for that money sent to China. The taxpayer is also paying for the funding of the trips of these various ferries. Now, ferries is a system in Canada that we need in great abundance. There are requirements for ferries all over the place. There are plenty of roads that end at the lake and they got no ferry in this country. All you got to do is leave the city to understand the impact of what steel and ferry building could be for this nation. Outside of the economic impact of having ferries and the infrastructure being built up north for Canada, let's just look at the manufacturing aspect of the economy, how we're taking this $1 billion and sending it to a country. And they say, yeah, but it can be done cheaper there. So if I understand you right, the way the Chinese do something is because they can make the labor of their product less expensive. Somewhere in there, they're cutting corners, whether it be the fact that they don't have to pay health care, whether it be the fact that they don't have to worry about the environmental cleanup and when they manufacture the steel. There's somewhere in there that they are cutting corners that then makes their product not as ethical as it would be were it made in Canada. And this is a product being made in Canada that's staying in Canada, paid for by Canadian tax dollars. I feel that we have the right to demand that it be built at ethical standards, that we shouldn't be worrying about how cheap it can be when our federal government is trying to convince you that you can't own a car because they want you to think that climate change is expensive. Which is it? Pick a decision. Make one choice. Stick with it. You're either on this side of the coin, you're on that side of the coin. You can't have it both ways whenever it suits your purpose and expect the Canadians are going to trust your decision-making processes. Mr. Carney claims to be an economist. He also claims to have a lot of passion and enjoyment for the way they do things in China, just like Mr. Trudeau, except for Mr. Trudeau wasn't claiming to be an economic wizard. What I know is that when you have a job, you spend money locally. It's stopping at the gas station at the way home. It's stopping at the coffee shop. Though spending money gives other people jobs, then they can spend money. Then they can have places to live. They can have all of the things that grocery stores are paid for. Their lunch they can give to their children. The after-school extracurricular programs they can give to their children. The better stuff that they can give to their children, who then in turn around and go for it, and so on and so forth. This is what creates a thriving culture. This is what you see Donald Trump doing down in the United States of America, who is doing a great job. And what I want to understand is, how does Mark Carney think that giving $1 billion to China is somehow going to improve the livelihoods of the people in the steel mill in the Sioux? Like, that makes very little sense to me. That makes very little sense to anybody who's looking at the situation, neutrally, who's just trying to get to the bottom of why the Liberal government isn't doing what's best for Canada. Why they are trying to do what's best for maybe one group of voters in British Columbia, but not Canada as a whole, not the steel industry in Canada, who they are claiming Donald Trump is causing a lot of problems for. And their solution to that is to source steel in China. Their solution to that is to build our military frigates in Finland and in Texas, again, with not locally sourced steel. This country has a lot of water and a lot of waterways, and we need to be building all of our ships in this country. We need to be a nation that is building and manufacturing our ships cleanly and ethically with good paying jobs, and we should have such a navy that the world trembles at the idea of the Canadian fleet sailing off of their shores. That we should have such a navy that China wouldn't even consider sending over a submarine. We should have such a navy that Russia will be careful putting their flag on the Arctic, underneath the ocean in the Arctic. We should have such a navy in this nation because we have the largest coastline. Not only do we have the largest coastline, we have the most internalized water. And yet we don't have a shipbuilding at all. We don't have a culture of shipbuilding at all. We have steel, we got copper, we got all kinds of stuff. And I'm sure that you and I could both convince anybody that might be on the left to go out on the lake for the day on a boat. And yet for some reason we don't have shipyards everywhere. We don't have this as a cultural trend. We don't have this as something that Canadians do. This ship was made in Canada by Canadians for Canadians. We're sending our money to China. We're sending our money to Finland. We're sending our money to Texas. We're not sending our money to Canadian shipyards and giving out Canadian jobs and having those ships go out into the world and spread the same kind of ethical and standards that Canada is supposed to be holding true, though I see less and less of that as the government of the Liberals continues to have power and dominion over this once great nation. Okay, let's talk about some of the spending that the government's getting away with and how many of you don't understand how they can get away with it when there was no parliament in session and all the rest of that, and there's no tabled budget. Many of you are trying to understand how it is that not only is the government spending money without a budget that's happening, but they're overspending money and they're putting us in generational debt. Yet you know that there was all kinds of chaos with the parliament at the beginning of the year. First, let me take you back to when Chrystia Freeland tabled that budget on nearly the last day of Parliament, and that budget was going to be for the year of 2025, right? The budget that's coming up is for next year. So the budget that was tabled by Chrystia Freeland last December was the one that's covered for this year. And you're like, yeah, but Parliament was interrupted and there was all kinds of things that happened about that. And you're right to be saying that. But what we have is a two-pronged answer. Okay, so firstly, we must establish that that budget was tabled. Now, there was a lot of talk about rejecting the budget. Had the NDP rejected the budget, had the NDP done the right thing for Canadians, that would have triggered an election and that would have led to a different process. It might have ended up in the same results, but it would have led to a different process. When the budget is shut down, that is essentially the budget is essentially a confidence vote. Without Parliament sitting, however, there is what's called a special warrant, and that is issued by the Governor General, because you must remember, as part of Canada's political system, the Governor General is technically at the top. It gets forgotten and it gets overlooked, but it's the facts. And yes, in many ways, the Governor General might very well be a figurehead, just like King Charles. However, the Governor General is the representative of King Charles in this country. And as Canada is a constitutional monarchy, not to be confused with the United States, this is not a republic. We are in part of the great British monarchy. We are a constitutional monarchy. And the head of this country is not the Prime Minister. The head of this country is the King of England. And that person's representative in Canada is the Governor General. And there are lieutenant governors for all of the provinces and territories. So when there is no Parliament sitting, all Mark Carney had to do was go to the Governor General and say, I need a special warrant. And that special warrant got the Treasury Department to release a whole bunch of money. Now, the PBO talks about it in a report they released over the summer. Special warrants are deemed to be an appropriation for the fiscal year in which they are issued. The amounts included in the special warrants will consequently be included in the next Appropriation Act for the fiscal year, but will not be voted on separately. The two special warrants that were issued due to the 2025 general election totaled $73.4 billion in expenditures, which was subsequently included in the 2025-26 main estimates. Special warrants have a timeline, have a time frame. They're typically about 45 days that they can go for. What happens is you come to the Governor General and you say, we must have this money. If we don't have this money, we're going to default on our loans, or people are going to have to go away from work without having been paid, and all of that kind of thing. So they go ahead and they issue these special warrants because Parliament is not in place to put it there. Now, this is one of the largest reasons that the Liberal government made a summer session. This is one of the biggest reasons. So when they came back into Parliament, when they came back into government for the 3 weeks there in the summertime, one of the things they ensured was that the government would go ahead and release the money that they need to make their bills, right? To ensure that the budget that was introduced in December was still going to be held as valid. That's why they went through that tiny little phase, that tiny little short time frame. Of course, what everybody misunderstands is because they say it's a budget doesn't mean they have to stick to the amounts that are budgeted. Once it's signed off on and approved on as a program or as an expenditure, the government then has free rein to overspend, or what you hear today is called deficit spending. For most of you that are going to be well versed in the government, the greatest example of that is going to be the Arrive scam, which should have been a little bit of money and ended up being millions of dollars. once the program initiates, they can just keep dumping money into it as they like. And this is how they go over the top. This is how they continue to send money to Ukraine, because the approvals was sent out from the time of December when Chrystia Freeland put that budget forward for this year. Then there was a pause. So the Governor General released money that is not part of the current budget, but will be tabled in November as $73 billion when according to the Mark Carney government, they're going to be putting it out in November. So when they put that out, that will be the budget for the year 2025, 2026. And then we will start to spend new monies on different programs and whatever it happens to be. And of course, we still will need Parliament to approve it. Now, we don't have as much, there's no NDP this time, but we have a lot more Liberals. So there's going to be a lot easier way for them to push through the exact same bad spending habits. So let's look forward to that kind of debt being shoved onto the shoulders of our great-grandchildren, because the Liberal government is very irresponsible with their spending, and the money that Canada can be making, they won't allow to come out of the ground, and what money they do generate, they send to other countries to be spending on it. So there's no way in the world that Canada is going to be coming out of this economic downward spiral, this sinking economy, with the way that the Liberal government's policies are and the way that the Liberal government's spending habits are. There's just simply no way in the world, because what we can do to get even with the money, to break even, they won't let us develop. And when they do take tax dollars off your check and right out of your pocket, they send it to China or they send it to another country. It's a bizarre sort of situation where Canadians should be more invested and more upset about what they're doing with our tax dollars. Now, if you don't want to get oil out of the ground, I leave that to your discretion. That's not really the point. But there's no reason for the government to be sending $1 billion to China to build ships. We should be building those ships in this country. We should be building everything that stays in Canada by Canadians, because that's what our tax dollars are for. Our tax dollars are to be looking after our country, not to be borrowing money and running up the debt to the point where you're spending more money on interest rates on our debts than you're spending on the hospitals in Canada. Even if we were to take half of what they're spending on debts in Canada and put that into hospitals, how well would that go over with cutting down our wait times and making sure that everybody had a doctor? I suppose that's a different video. I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I would encourage all of you to share this video with your socials. I'll talk to you next time.